The rain had been coming sideways for 11 days, and the mountain had been gone for all of them. This was normal. Celestina said so every morning, standing at her door with her hands around a cup she didn't drink from, looking at the cloud where the mountain was supposed to be. Normal, she said, to no one in particular, to her nephew who was already gone to school, to the dog, to the air. The wet season came, and the cloud came, and the mountain went inside it, and this was the agreement. She had lived 71 years inside this agreement. She did not find it comforting exactly, but she found it correct, which was better. Mateo didn't find it anything. The mountain was, or it wasn't. When it was there, he didn't look at it. When it wasn't there, he didn't look at the cloud. He had more pressing things to not look at. Market day was Thursday, and Thursday came regardless of the rain. The street filled up from 7 in the morning. The women from the upper farms first, their carrying cloths dark with wet. Then the traders who came in on the road from Sequani with their trucks and their different Spanish. Then everyone else. The street was not long enough for the market. It never was. It spilled into the square and down the two side alleys and into the open ground by the church, where Padre Renato would stand in the doorway looking at the tarps over the produce stalls as if they had personally offended him. Mateo came down at 8. He came down because his mother had sent him for rice, and because staying in the house while his mother found things for him to do was worse than the rain. He moved through it, the way he always moved through it. With Doña Perpetua, he stopped and spoke Quechua, asking after her daughter in Cusco, receiving the answer in full because Doña Perpetua's daughter's situation was the kind of situation that required a complete accounting to every person who asked. And Mateo had learned years ago that the quickest way through was not to interrupt. With the truck traders, he became someone else. His father's Spanish, the one that sounded like somewhere else, and they relaxed into it the way people relaxed when they heard something familiar in an unfamiliar place. With the boys from his school, he was a third thing. With his mother's cousin Rodrigo, he was a fourth. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. He didn't think about it anymore, the shifting. It happened the way breathing happened. Somewhere underneath it, at a depth he didn't visit, there was a version of himself that was none of these things, and all of them. But that version had been quiet for a long time, and he didn't miss it exactly. You didn't miss things you'd stopped noticing were gone. He saw Ephraim by the vegetable stalls. This was the thing that still registered. Everything else in the market was information, prices, faces, the angle of Doña Perpetua's grievance. But Ephraim was not information. Ephraim was the one place the processing stopped and something else happened instead. Something he hadn't named and didn't intend to name, for reasons that had nothing to do with the feeling itself and everything to do with what the feeling would mean in a town of 800 people where the land dispute between her family and his father's family was older than either of them and had not softened with time. He understood at 17 exactly how it would be used. His father's family already watched him for signs of divided loyalty. The mixed heritage boy, the one who might go native, the one who couldn't be trusted to remember which side the land was on. Wanting Ephraim would not be seen as wanting Ephraim. It would be seen as a move, a concession, a betrayal, or an infiltration, depending on who was telling the story. He had no interest in being a move in a conflict he hadn't started and couldn't finish. He had 8 months left in this town, and he was going to leave intact. So he filed it. The way he filed everything, he was fluid in the filing by now. Ephraim was buying onions. She was 17, tall, and she had a way of standing that suggested she was paying attention to something slightly above the immediate situation, as if she was listening for something the rest of them couldn't hear. Mateo had noticed this about her for 2 years. He had also noticed the particular way her left hand moved when she was counting change, and the fact that she always wore the same green jacket regardless of the weather, and approximately 30 other specific things that Mateo had filed and not acted on. He bought the rice. He went home. There was a thing Mateo knew that he had not told anyone. 6 weeks ago, before the cloud came down, he had been on the path above the town. He had been on the path above the town because Ephraim sometimes walked that way in the late afternoon, and Mateo had been. He didn't have a word for what he had been doing. Present. Available. In the vicinity, without intention. Ephraim hadn't come. What came instead was a movement in the cloud. The cloud had been low that afternoon, sitting on the upper slopes the way it sometimes did before it decided whether to descend or lift. Mateo had been looking at it without looking at it, attending to something else, and then the cloud moved in a way clouds didn't move. Large. The shape of it, briefly, 3 seconds, maybe 4, was the shape of something with a body, something structured. The cloud closed again, and there was nothing. He stood on the path for a while after. He thought altitude. He thought light. He thought about the thing they said about the mountain, the thing Celestina said and his mother said, and the voice she used when she was speaking as a person from here, rather than as the woman who had married outside. The mountain shows itself to the people who belong to it. He had heard this his whole life. He had followed it with the rest of the things he filed. The ritual calendar, the names of the Apis, the prayers his mother said at the door on the first of each month. Things that were real in the sense that people built their lives around him without being things he could verify. He had seen a shape in the cloud. He had not reported it, because if it was real, it meant something he wasn't ready for it to mean. If the mountain showed itself to the people who belonged to it, and had shown itself to him, who belonged to 2 things and therefore to neither, who performed belonging 7 different ways a day and felt it in none of them, then he was going to have to decide what that meant about him. Belonging to this place meant inheriting everything this place carried. The land dispute, the old quarrel, the specific weight of being a body in a community where bodies were also arguments. He was not ready to inherit any of it. He was 17, and he was going to leave in 8 months, and he needed things to stay unclear for 8 more months. He had kicked the loose stone off the path and gone home and made himself not think about it. He had been not thinking about it for 6 weeks. Celestina had been watching the cloud for 11 days, and on the 12th day it lifted. She was at her door with a cup she didn't drink from. It was 2 in the afternoon. The rain had stopped an hour before. In a different way it stopped in the wet season. Not gradually, a switch. 1 moment rain, and then no rain, the air still holding the memory of it. She was watching the cloud out of habit, not out of expectation, because she had not expected anything for 11 days and had been correct not to expect anything, and she was still not expecting anything when the cloud moved. It lifted from the bottom. This was how it usually lifted. The base of the mountain appearing first, then the mid-slopes, then the summit last, still wearing a small cap of white. She knew the sequence. She had watched it hundreds of times. She was already interpreting it in the normal way, already preparing the small internal acknowledgement she made when the mountain returned. A thing without words, just a settling. The agreement continues. When she saw the upper slope, something was on the upper slope. She looked at it for a long time. She went through the categories. She was a methodical woman, and her methodology had served her well for 71 years, and she applied it now. Apu manifestation. But the Apu was the mountain, not a thing on the mountain, and the Apu did not have a body in the sense did not have the shade this had. Animal. She got stuck here for a while. It was proportioned like an animal. The proportions were the proportions of something she almost knew. But the scale was the problem. She could not hold the scale in any category she had for animals. She kept trying and the scale kept refusing. Disease form. She had heard of this, a manifestation of collective illness, but it required a specific ritual context, and the community had not performed the rituals that preceded such a manifestation. And anyway, disease forms were not this solid, this. She didn't have the word, this there. She went through 9 more categories. She was thorough. She gave each one its due consideration. None of them held. She set down the cups she hadn't drunk from. She went inside and put on her other shoes, the good ones, because whatever this was, she was not going to meet it in her house shoes. Then she went out to find someone to tell. The cloud had fully lifted by the time Mateo came back out. He had come back out because he'd forgotten to buy cooking oil, and his mother had sent him back, and he was crossing the square when he heard Doña Perpetua make a sound he had never heard Doña Perpetua make. He turned. Everyone in the square was facing the mountain. He turned. The entity was on the upper slope. It was. He looked at it, and his mind did the thing it did when it couldn't process, which was to keep trying. Dog, he thought. The shape was a dog shape, the head, body, leg proportion, but the scale. He kept arriving at the scale and leaving again. His mind would not stay with it. Every time he brought his attention to it, his attention slid off. Something like a dog. Something the size of. He didn't finish the thought. It was moving along the upper slope. Not toward the town. Not away. It was moving the way an animal moved when it was doing something, not going somewhere. He watched it move and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, something from underneath all the filed away information, and what it was. I saw this. 6 weeks ago I saw this and I said nothing. The shape in the cloud. 3 seconds, maybe 4. This was what had been in the cloud. Something happened to his breathing. He was aware of it from outside. My breathing is doing something wrong. And then he stopped being aware of it from outside because the outside stopped working. He was just standing there. He was just standing there watching it. Then it stopped moving. It stood on the upper slope and did something. He couldn't see clearly from this distance, but he understood what he was seeing before he had words for it. It was shedding. The way a dog shook water, but not water. Something from the body. A layer. A casing. The thing left the body of the entity slowly, in a way he couldn't look away from, and it began to come down the slope. Not fast. Not dramatic. The way water moved in the wet season, following the gradient, finding the path of least resistance. It covered the lower quarter of the town in the time it took Mateo to remember to move. He moved. He ran before he thought where. His feet decided, and he followed them. And where they went was the vegetable stalls, where Ephraim had been buying onions, an hour ago. The membrane. He didn't have a word for it, but membrane was what arrived in his mind and stayed. Was translucent. He could see through it. He could see the woman who sold potatoes, still selling potatoes. He could see 2 men arguing about something by the church wall. He could see a child running between the stalls the way children ran when they were running for the pleasure of running, and not from anything. He could see all of them continuing. None of them had stopped. None of them appeared to know something had changed. And he could see Ephraim standing near the onion stalls, her head slightly lifted, listening for something above the immediate situation. He reached the edge of the membrane. The sound reached him just before he reached it. Not through his ears, or through his ears, but wrong, arriving as something else. Color. A color that was his mother's kitchen in the morning, the yellow of the wall in the early light before anyone else was up. He didn't understand why he was seeing color. He stood at the edge of the membrane, and he was seeing his mother's kitchen, and Ephraim was inside it, and the entity was on the upper slope still doing what it was doing. And the people inside the membrane were continuing their afternoon, and the people outside were now gathering behind him. The voices starting, the arguments starting, Celestina's voice among them, trying to be heard over the others. He put his hand through. No resistance. His hand went through and came back. His hand was the same. He looked at it for a moment. He looked at Ephraim. He looked at the mountain. The entity had not stopped. It had not turned. It had not done anything that suggested it knew there was a town here, or people, or a 17-year-old boy standing at the edge of what it had left behind it. It was doing something biological on the upper slope, and the town was in the way, and that was all. He had told himself for 6 weeks that the mountain showed itself to the people who belonged to it. He had held this as a question about himself that he didn't want answered. The entity did not know he existed. He stood at the edge of the membrane, and behind him 40 people were arguing about what to do, and inside the membrane a woman was selling potatoes, and Ephraim was standing very still with her head lifted and her left hand moving, the way it moved when she was counting change, except there was nothing in her hand. Mateo kept his hand at the edge. He did not go in. Not yet. The rain started again.